Case of Abril Perez-Sagayan. Abril Perez-Sagayan was born in 1971 in Monterrey, Nuevo León, Mexico. Her mother, Maria del Secro, worked diligently 7 days a week to ensure her 3 children, Abril, Javier, and Ana, had the opportunity for the best possible education and a bright future. Even at a young age, Abril displayed an exceptional aptitude for science and made it her goal to pursue higher education and financial independence. As Abril matured, she embodied a unique combination of intelligence, compassion, and physical beauty. Her sociable nature and innate leadership qualities made her an inspiration to her friends and a standout professional in her field. She earned a bachelor's degree from the University of Nuevo León and a master's degree in business from the Monterrey Institute of Technology. As Abril's career progressed, she discovered her passion for digital sales and rapidly climbed the ranks. She attained a prominent position as an executive director at Bilbao Bank in the United States. During the early 1990s, a time when Abril's professional accomplishments were flourishing, she met Juan Carlos Garcia Sanchez. Juan Carlos was an ambitious entrepreneur, born on November 11, 1968. Juan Carlos and Abril discovered they had a lot in common. Both had attended the Monterrey Institute of Science and Technology, where Abril studied and Juan Carlos earned his degree with high academic achievement. Juan Carlos had also studied at top U.S. universities, including the University of Pennsylvania and Harvard. With his education and experience, he considered himself a professional entrepreneur in e-commerce and financial technology. Juan and Abril became inseparable, collaborating on projects and socializing in the same friend circle. As time passed, their friendship blossomed into romance. After a few years of dating, they decided to tie the knot, and their wedding took place in 1994. Their collaboration led to numerous successful projects, including the online stores PAG, Mobile, and Plascom. They also played a key role in the development of the Dem store, which became a leading e-commerce platform in Mexico. By 1999, their life appeared to be a perfect fairy tale, with both partners achieving great success in their careers and enjoying a happy relationship. Their joy was further amplified with the birth of their first child, Ana Cecilia, in 2001. 2 years later, they welcomed a son, Juan Carlos Jr., followed by another son, Julio Andres, in 2005. Despite their busy schedules, Abril prioritized her children's needs, taking care of them personally and attending their school activities. Abril's devotion earned her the respect and admiration of those around her. Juan Carlos was also a dedicated father, and together they created a seemingly ideal family that many people envied. However, behind the facade, the family was struggling with difficulties, and all members suffered due to Juan's short temper. Juan was a cruel man who frequently lashed out at anyone who crossed his path. His behavior towards his wife, Abril, began with verbal abuse, making her feel uncomfortable and hurt with his insulting words. Over time, the situation worsened, and Juan started using physical violence against Abril, regularly beating her. Abril attempted to conceal the abuse from her friends and family, fearing that she wouldn't be able to provide for their children on her own. She believed that staying with Juan would give their children a better future. However, by 2009, the situation had become so severe that others began to suspect what was happening in the family. Abril has always kept it a secret from her friends and family, but whenever they asked about a possible divorce, she insisted that she wouldn't leave Juan. By 2014, Juan had reached the pinnacle of his career, becoming a prominent figure in Amazon's retail industry in Mexico. A year later, when Juan became the director of Amazon in Mexico, the family had to relocate to Mexico City. Abril hoped that the change of scenery would resolve their problems, but unfortunately, the abuse continued. Juan Carlos presented himself as a loving husband and father to the public, but behind closed doors, he was abusive and controlling towards his wife, Abril. He would often post on social media about how much he loved her, but in reality, he was constantly accusing her of cheating and even hired a private investigator to gather evidence. Despite his successful career, which included becoming the director of e-commerce at a multinational company, his marriage was deteriorating. The tension between him and Abril became unbearable, and after a trip to Monterrey to celebrate Christmas with her family, she realized she couldn't stay in the marriage any longer. During the trip, Juan's anger boiled over, and he physically attacked Abril, grabbing her by the neck and strangling her. He had received a photo from the private investigator of Abril with a male colleague, which he mistakenly believed was her lover. In reality, the man was just a co-worker. Abril decided not to engage with Juan's accusations and instead filed for divorce on January 4, 2019. They had already separated and planned to inform their children about their impending divorce. However, the situation took a violent turn one early morning. Abril was asleep when she was suddenly struck on the head with a baseball bat by her partner, Juan. Initially disoriented, Abril thought the ceiling had collapsed, but as her vision cleared, she saw Juan standing over her. She attempted to push him away and escape, but he overpowered her, prompting her to scream for help. Their 16-year-old son rushed to his mother's aid, quickly assessing the situation and intervening to prevent Juan from causing further harm. He managed to get Abril away from Juan and escorted her out of the house to seek emergency medical attention for her injuries. After the incident, Juan took to social media to share his side of the story. He made several posts claiming that Abril had been unfaithful, stolen his money, and wasted 26 years of his life. He also alleged that Abril had physically attacked him, stabbing him in the chest with a knife. To support his claims, he attached photos of the knife and what appeared to be bloodstains. One of Juan's friends responded by recording a video asking people to share the information. However, Juan's posts became increasingly bizarre. At one point, he even posted a message claiming that Abril had taken her life, despite being clearly alive. This move remains puzzling to this day. Meanwhile, Abril had been recovering in the hospital. After her discharge, she immediately filed a police report against her husband. The authorities sided with her, granting her custody of their 2 children and ordering Juan to pay 6,000 Mexican pesos, approximately $1,350, in monthly alimony. However, this amount was deemed insufficient to cover the costs of raising their 2 minors. After overcoming her initial fear and financial struggles, Abril began a new chapter in her life, driven by her determination to create a better future for her children. She relocated to Monterrey with her kids, where she attended Juan Carlos' trial and filed for divorce. Reflecting on her traumatic experience and the abuse she suffered, Abril reevaluated her life. She joined a Christian organization that supported families and started working as a divorce counselor. Her ultimate goal was to establish a support system for women who had endured similar abuse, just as she had. As Abril worked towards rebuilding her life, the court proceedings against Juan Carlos continued. 9 months after the attack, Juan was formally charged with attempted murder. The case was then brought to court, where Judge Federico Mask ordered Juan's informal arrest. Consequently, Juan was incarcerated for several weeks. Juan appealed the verdict, and on November 3, 2019, Judge Hector Jimenez reviewed the case. He found the hospital photographs and Abril's testimony, along with that of her son, insufficient to prove Juan's guilt. The judge also believed that if Juan had intended to kill Abril, he would have done so. Additionally, he considered the baseball bat used in the attack to be a blunt object rather than a deadly weapon. As a result, the charges were downgraded and the preliminary arrest was cancelled. With only a few hearings remaining, the outcome of the case was uncertain, causing Abril and her loved one significant anxiety and frustration. In a desperate attempt to have her concerns heard, Abril wrote to the judge, expressing her fears for her life and pleading for him to consider the threat Juan posed. However, her letter was ignored. Juan then began a custody battle for their children. Abril was forced to leave Monterrey and travel to Mexico City for the remaining hearings. She also had to subject her children to psychological evaluations, as Juan had claimed in his lawsuit that Abril had manipulated them into rejecting him. A week before a critical court hearing, Abril sat down with her 3 children to express her love and wishes for their future. She encouraged them to chase their dreams and find the strength to forgive their father. This conversation seemed like a farewell, as if Abril sensed that it might be her last opportunity to reassure her children of her love. On November 25, 2019, Abril followed her ex-husband's instructions to avoid potential legal issues that could have led to her separation from her children. She traveled to Mexico City, coincidentally on the same day that thousands of women marched in the streets to commemorate the International Day Against Gender-Based Violence on March 19, 2021. The court reclassified a case involving violence against Abril, which occurred in January 2019, as attempted murder. This decision was made after Abril's relatives and the prosecutor filed several petitions for judicial review, ultimately leading to the cancellation of the original decision. 2 months later, on May 23rd, the remaining suspects in Abril's murder case were apprehended, including 3 women and 1 man. The investigation resulted in the issuance of 3 search warrants and 8 arrest warrants. During the first search, 48-year-old Amanda Vicente Rodriguez was taken into custody. a series of arrests were made in connection with a recent crime. In the Jardín de Morelos colony, 34-year-old Mabel Montelier Morena and 48-year-old Garcia Alicia Flores Valdez were taken into custody and their mobile phones were seized. Another arrest was made in the Alvar Aragon colony in Mexico City, where 50-year-old Isa Jalil Castillo, also known as Aguirre or Alvar's godmother, was detained. At the same time, 9 gang members were apprehended, with 7 of them allegedly linked to the Abril case. However, one suspect, Juan Carlos, remained at large, prompting authorities to reissue a warrant for his arrest. General Prosecutor Ernesto Godoy explained that the initial warrant was for attempted murder, while the new one was for the actual killing of a woman. Despite efforts to locate Juan, he remained elusive. In a surprising turn of events, a man named Rolf, also known as El Shalom, contacted the authorities and claimed to have information about the case. During questioning, he revealed that he was the one who had actually pulled the trigger and taken Abril's life. The perpetrator, Rodolfo Daniel Bendis, eventually pleaded guilty to the crime. He claimed that Juan Carlos had promised to pay him $10,000 to carry out the crime. According to Bendis, Juan Carlos had contacted him while he was in pretrial detention, provided him with the address of Abril in Mexico City. Juan Carlos allegedly instructed Bendis to spy on Abril and provided written instructions on how to commit the crime. He also promised to provide Bendis with a gun in Monterrey. However, when Bendis arrived in Monterrey, no one contacted him, and he did not receive the gun. He returned to Mexico City and did not hear from Juan Carlos again until after his release from prison. Upon his release, Juan Carlos contacted Bendis again and informed him that the plan had changed. He now wanted Abril to be killed in Mexico City, as he had managed to lure her there. The case was divided into multiple hearings due to the complexity of the judicial system. The first trial began in August 2022 with Bendis and Juan Carlos as the initial defendants. During this trial, the prosecution presented 28 witness statements and 14 pieces of expert evidence. During the recent trial, a key defendant known as L. Sean Gowlin testified about his role in planning committing the crime of feminicide for which he had previously pleaded guilty. On May 19, 2023, the court delivered its verdict, finding Rodolfo Danielo Baza and Juan Carlos Rodriguez guilty and sentencing them to 52 years in prison. Additionally, they were ordered to pay approximately 56,000 Mexican pesos, $30,000 in damages. Following the trial, they men were taken to a detention center to begin serving their sentences. However, the Abril family immediately announced their intention to appeal the verdict, as they believed the sentence was too lenient. They pointed out that Rodolfo was the one who fired the fatal shots. As for the remaining defendants, it was previously decided in October 2014 that their trials would be divided. This decision was met with an appeal from prosecutors, who argued that it would significantly delay the proceedings and result in unnecessary additional costs for the court. The tragic case of Abril continues to affect her family and the wider Mexican society, and despite the recent verdict, the trials are not yet over. After the court hearing, Abril got into a car with her children and their lawyer. She asked the lawyer to drive them to the airport for their flight back to Monterrey. En route, they stopped at an intersection where a motorcyclist pulled up beside them. The motorcyclist, who was actually a hired assassin, shot Abril multiple times in the head. Luckily, her children, who were seated in the back, escaped serious harm. One child, who was lying down, was grazed by a bullet but suffered only minor injury. Abril was rushed to the hospital where doctors fought to save her life. Despite their efforts, she succumbed to her injuries 6 hours later. The lawyer immediately contacted Abril's family to inform them of the tragedy. Her brother Javier traveled to Mexico City to handle the aftermath of the incident. The community suspected Juan Carlos of being involved in the crime, but the authorities took a different stance. Since the shooter's identity motives were unknown, they couldn't classify the case as femicide and make an arrest. Instead, the case was initially treated as a murder, and the police launched an investigation to gather evidence that could potentially prove it was a femicide. Abril's friend took to social media to accuse Juan Carlos, but her account was deleted as a result. Abril's family was fearful that the perpetrator would go unpunished and sought to raise public awareness about the case through social media. The fact that Abril died on a day dedicated to fighting gender-based violence added a deeper significance to her death. The family organized protests and marches to demand justice for Abril. Following Abril's tragic death, social media erupted in outrage as people realized that she had repeatedly expressed her fear of her abuser, only to be ignored by the authorities. Her family and friends held a funeral mass at the Benito Flores Chapel in Monterrey, where dozens gathered to pay their respects and demand justice for Abril. The funeral procession then proceeded to the Pantheon Garden in Los Angeles, where Abril was laid to rest. Her case has sparked widespread attention to the issue of gender-based violence, particularly in cases where judges release men who have attacked women. Abril's ex-husband, Juan Carlos, was released from prison after appealing his sentence and was able to track Abril down to Mexico City, where he ultimately took her life. In response to Abril's case, the Mexican General Prosecutor's Office has launched an investigation into the judges who allowed Juan Carlos to be released from prison. The judges in question, Carlos Trillo Rodriguez, Federico Mosa Gonzalez, and Hector Jimenez Lopez, are being investigated for their roles in Juan Carlos' release. Additionally, representatives of the party of former Mexican President Andrés Manuel López Obrador are calling for Judge Mosa's removal from office, citing his involvement in a previous controversial case in which he released a doctor who had disrespected a patient in a public hospital. The judge initially declined to charge Juan Carlos with femicide, instead only charging him with sexual violence, after which he was released from custody. During the public outcry surrounding the Abril case, Rafael Guerra, the president of the Supreme Court of Mexico City, suspended all judges involved in the case on November 29th. Mexico City's head of government, Claudia Sheinbaum, stated that the government would investigate Abril's death. She also warned that the judges involved in the case could be held accountable for Abril's death if it was proven that Juan Carlos was responsible. Local and international media reported that Juan Carlos was released despite evidence against him. Abril's family established a non-profit organization called the Voice of Abril to provide support to victims of violence, including information, psychological assistance, and legal aid. The public demonstration sparked by Abril's death prompted the prosecutor's office to reclassify the case against Juan Carlos, seeking to prosecute him for attempted murder, which could result in his imprisonment. After being charged, Juan Carlos took to social media to claim that he wanted justice for the crime against Abril and that the perpetrator should be punished. He also stated that he was willing to cooperate with the police despite having a troubled marriage with Abril, and he would never have wanted her to meet such a tragic end. However, his post sparked widespread discontent among the community. His 18-year-old daughter, Ana Cecilia, publicly spoke out against her father, accusing him of physically and mentally abusing her, her siblings, and Abril over the years. She shared disturbing photos of Abril's injuries after being attacked with a baseball bat. Ana described her father as a narcissistic sociopath who allegedly bribed his way out of prison. During the ongoing investigation and protests, an arrest warrant was issued for Juan Carlos, but it was not directly related to the Abril case. Instead, it was due to him violating judicial duties. Although he was released on the condition that he would check in with the police station weekly, he failed to do so. After missing 2 court hearings, Judge Agustin Monra Gaspar Canel was left with no choice but to issue the order. One wrote a letter claiming he feared for his life and did not want to attend the hearings, stating he and his family had received death threats since Abril's death. He believed someone would seek revenge if he appeared in court. However, the judge rejected this excuse and issued an arrest warrant, also restricting Juan from leaving the country. The investigation continued, aiming to uncover the truth. A letter from Juan was discovered, in which he again denied involvement in Abril's death, claiming he never intended to harm her. He described the night of the incident, stating that Abril had initiated a fight, stabbing him in the side, and he had hit her with a bat in self-defense. The letter sparked outrage among those who heard it, with no one believing Juan's account. The investigation has revealed that Juan Carlos is the primary suspect in the case. Further investigation by the police has identified at least 7 other individuals involved in the crime against Abril. This conclusion was reached after reviewing surveillance footage from the area where the events occurred. The footage shows 2 cars following Abril as she left the courthouse. The drivers of these cars were in contact with the perpetrator who fatally shot Abril. After the attack, the perpetrator and their cars fled the scene. Although the identities of the pursuers were not yet known at the time, the investigation suggested that Juan Carlos may have been involved in the crime. According to investigators, Juan Carlos likely met these individuals while he was in prison and paid one of them to protect him. After his associates were released from prison, Juan Carlos was also released. He then paid them to kill Abril. Notably, Juan Carlos was the only one who knew Abril's route to Mexico City, as he had requested to meet her. After the shocking details of the case became public, no law firm was willing to defend the suspect, Juan Carlos. Meanwhile, Abril's loved ones and colleagues cooperated fully with law enforcement, providing any information that could aid in his capture. However, Sources from the General Prosecutor's Office soon revealed that Juan Carlos had managed to flee Mexico by crossing the border into the United States. Mexican authorities swiftly alerted Interpol, which launched a global manhunt for Juan Carlos. As a result, he became a wanted man in over 151 countries, with authorities determined to apprehend him at all costs. By the end of January 2024, the case had gone cold, with no new leads or updates. For years have passed since Abril's tragic death, yet the true perpetrators remain unpunished. Her children are now living with her family on the outskirts of Mexico City, holding on to the hope that justice will eventually be served. Question on everyone's mind remains, where is Juan Carlos? His capture is still the top priority for the authorities. Abril's family has vowed to continue fighting for justice until Juan Carlos is found and brought to justice. The case of Brianna Zunino. A lot of people are concerned that an autopsy is scheduled today to identify a woman's body that was found in Reno, Nevada, on Friday. There is a possibility that it could be the missing college student Brianna Dennison. The body was found in a field on the edge of the campus of the University of Nevada, which is less than 10 miles from the house where Dennison was last seen in the winter of 2008. Brianna Zunino Dennison, a vibrant 19-year-old college student with a bright future, vanished without a trace, sending shockwaves through the community and igniting a relentless search for answers. As news of Brianna's disappearance spread, an army of volunteers, law enforcement agencies, and concerned citizens came together, determined to bring her home safely. Brianna's family and friends, gripped by fear and uncertainty, clung to hope while sharing stories of her infectious laughter, unwavering spirit, and love for life. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months as the search intensified. The quest for answers led investigators down a dark and twisted path, uncovering a heinous series of crimes. Law enforcement tirelessly pursued leads, meticulously piecing together the puzzle surrounding Brianna's disappearance. Their dedication and determination remained unwavering in their pursuit of justice. This is the story of Brianna Zunino Dennison, a young woman whose life was tragically cut short, but whose memory continues to inspire. Brianna Zunino Dennison was born on March 29, 1988, to Jeff Dennison and Bridget Dennison. Her mother lovingly called her Breezy because she reminded her of a refreshing breeze on a cool summer day. When Brianna was 6 years old, her father passed away, which was a difficult time for the family as the loss of a loved one always is. However, she persevered through the pain with the support of her loved ones. She spent her childhood in Reno, Nevada, and her mother's native town of Mendocino, California. Brianna's passion for traveling and world cultures took her to Hawaii, New York, Mexico, Jamaica, Japan, Italy, Egypt, Hungary, Austria, and France. She studied abroad in Rome, Italy, for a year with her family. Her ability to connect with people from all walks of life became part of her radiant personality. Brianna was raised in a tradition that valued children as the most precious possessions. Her relatives and close friends instilled in her the importance of being a loving, spiritual, respectful, and trusting human being. She had a deep affection for children and animals, particularly her dog, Ozzy. Brianna graduated from Reno High School in 2006 and was a sophomore at Santa Barbara City College, where she was majoring in child psychology. On January 20, 2008, Brianna returned home to Reno from sunny Santa Barbara during the winter break to visit some friends and family. She and her friends had attended events organized by Summer Winter Action Tours, LLC, a travel agency that catered to students. They also attended the Martin Luther King Jr. Gala weekend in Reno, which Brianna had reportedly attended in the past. On that specific day, she was last observed alive at approximately 4 a.m. Pacific time at her friend's house near the University of Nevada campus on McKay Court in Reno. She had gone there to sleep after attending a party at the Sands Regency on North Arlington Avenue. When her friend woke up the next morning around 9 a.m., Brianna was nowhere to be found. A small blood stain was noticed on the pillow where Brianna had slept that night, and her cell phone, purse, and shoes were all left at the house, which prompted her friend to alert Brianna's parents and local authorities. When investigators arrived, they assessed the crime scene. In the following days, detectives conducted a forensic investigation of the McKay Court residence where Brianna was staying when she was abducted. They found DNA on a doorknob that belonged to an unidentified male. The investigators were able to confirm that the blood on the pillow belonged to Brianna and began focusing on a kidnapping scenario. The detectives began searching the University of Nevada, Reno area for Brianna, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, FBI, joined the search efforts. The DNA found on the doorknob the night Brianna disappeared was linked to at least 2 sexually motivated attacks in the same area in the previous months, one on November 13th and the second on December 16th, 2007. On January 29, 2008, a woman from Reno claimed that she knew another victim who had revealed that she was raped at gunpoint in a garage on the University of Nevada, Reno campus in October 2007. However, the victim had not reported the crime. The investigators released a description of the potential suspected perpetrator based on this information, which was considered a positive lead. Identifiers used by women who had been sexually assaulted by the suspect were used to track down the perpetrator. The detectives began interviewing nearly 100 registered sex offenders who live within a mile of the McKay court home, but none seemed to be responsible for Brianna's disappearance. Around 1,700 people, including Nevada's then First Lady, Dawn Gibbons, wife of then Governor Jim Gibbons, volunteered to participate in a physical search of a 100-square-mile area to find Brianna, who went missing, but to no avail. On February 15, 2008, a man named Albert Jimenez in Reno was just returning from his lunch break at a Subway restaurant. As he was walking by the road, he noticed bright orange-colored fabrics standing out among a pile of discarded tree limbs lying in a ditch near a Reno business park. When he approached closer, he discovered neon orange socks, which were attached to feet, which at first he thought was a mannequin, but later turned out to be a woman. Jimenez had heard about Brianna Dennison's kidnapping, but didn't think the victim resembled the photographs he had seen on billboards. Jimenez did not have a mobile phone, so he promptly returned to his workplace, EE Technologies, to call the Reno police. When the police arrived at the South Reno lot, Jimenez was informed that the victim was Brianna Dennison. As an autopsy report had confirmed that the body found in a field near a Reno business park was hers, Brianna had been assaulted and killed. A piece of underwear was also found near Brianna's body, along with DNA evidence from the perpetrator and an unknown female. The police believed that the underwear did not belong to Brianna and might have been left there too to taunt the investigators. The police then asked anyone who recognized the underwear as theirs to come forward, as they might have information about the perpetrator's identity, but no one came forward. On January 29, 2008, the Reno police released a description of the unknown perpetrator. The person in question was also linked to at least 2 sexual assaults in November and December 2007, and a woman claimed to have been raped in a parking lot in October. Previous victims had provided enough detailed information for the police to sketch a suspect. An item of underwear was found near Dennison's body, along with the killer's DNA and the DNA of an unidentified woman. The police stated that the item of clothing did not belong to Dennison and may have been left near her body to taunt the investigators. The police are asking anyone who recognizes the item of clothing as theirs to come forward, as they may know the identity of the perpetrator. On Tuesday, November 25, 2008, 27-year-old James Michael Bella from Sparks, Nevada, was arrested and taken into custody at the Washoe County Jail. He was charged with murder, first-degree kidnapping, and sexual assault. Bella was apprehended while he was dropping off his son at the Stepping Stones Children's Center in Reno. Bella had already provided the police with a DNA sample collected from a doorknob in Brianna's friend's house. The detectives also discovered that Bella was a former Marine and had been previously arrested in 2001 for threatening his former girlfriend's neighbor with a knife. On Wednesday, November 26, 2008, during a press conference held by the Reno Police Department, it was confirmed that the DNA collected from Bella matched the DNA found at the crime scene, positively linking him to the murder of Brianna Dennison and a previous sexual assault. It was also revealed that a friend of his girlfriend had turned in Bella via the secret witness program on November 1, 2008. After Bella's girlfriend had confided to this friend that she had found underwear unknown to her in Bella's truck as they were coming back from Washington State, where Bella had taken a job in March 2008. News media reports of Brianna's case, including a police sketch of the suspect and a description of a vehicle used in another rape, the month before Brianna's abduction, began circulating. Bella was questioned by detectives about his atrocity after the secret witness tip came in, but he denied his involvement and declined to provide a DNA sample. Bella's girlfriend was also questioned and gave police permission to obtain DNA from her 4-year-old son, whom Bella had fathered. The test confirmed that his direct relative, Bella in this case, had left a DNA sample collected at the home where Brianna Dennison was abducted and at the other rape that had taken place the prior month. On his way to Washington, it was also revealed that Bella had sold his truck in Idaho, which matched the description of the vehicle used in the previous sexual assault. At the press conference, officials mentioned that the vehicle was being returned to Reno to be searched and used as evidence in the case against him. On Thursday, May 27, 2010, Bella was found guilty of the murder of Brianna Dennison, and after deliberating for about 9 hours, the jury returned a guilty verdict for all counts against Bella, which included kidnapping, sexual assault, and murder. The defense attorneys argued against the death penalty, stating that Bella suffered an abusive childhood due to an alcoholic father, that he had been a productive member of society before his crimes, and that he was a model prisoner. However, the jurors did not accept these mitigating factors and handed out the death sentence. On July 30, 2010, Bella was sentenced to 4 additional life sentences for multiple counts of rape and kidnapping associated with attacks on 2 victims before Brianna's abduction and murder. Over the years, Bella's appeals have been denied. The story of Brianna Zunino Dennison is one of resilience, heartbreak, and the unyielding pursuit of justice. Brianna's family, who faced unimaginable pain and uncertainty, stood strong in their fight for justice. Their unwavering determination became a beacon of hope for others facing similar tragedies. The legacy of Brianna's story reaches far beyond her case. It has sparked crucial conversations, inspired community initiatives, and brought awareness to the issues of violence and safety. Law enforcement's tireless efforts ultimately led to the apprehension and conviction of the individual responsible for Brianna's abduction and murder. Their dedication and unwavering commitment to finding justice showcased the power of teamwork and determination. As we remember Brianna, we hold on to the memories of her vibrant spirit, her love for life, and the impact she had on those who knew her. Her story serves as a reminder of the importance of community, compassion, and standing up against violence. In the end, Brianna Zunino Dennison's legacy will live on not only through the love of her family and friends, but through the collective efforts to create a safer world for others. Police sirens were heard throughout the Denver neighborhood on October 5, 1996, in response to a call about an apartment in the 1900 block of East 17th Avenue. Terry Turocek, a 35-year-old woman, was found dead inside. Terry was found by the police to have been strangled and had suffered serious head injuries. What could have happened between Terry and her attacker to cause her tragic death? And who could have committed such an evil act? With a population of 700,000, Denver, Colorado has a vibrant mix of history and culture that draws many visitors to its many museums. With a wealth of historical and recreational sites, this city seamlessly blends the old and the new. The small-town feel of Denver's neighborhoods is reflected in the welcoming locals who are known for their adventurous spirit and who frequently know their neighbors by name. However, Denver faces urban challenges, such as having one of the highest crime rates in the country. This problem casts a shadow over its tight-knit neighborhoods. The unsolved Terry Turocek case from 1996 serves as a sobering reminder of this darker side of the city's existence. Terry Turocek, who was born on May 14, 1961, was from Michigan's vast countryside. She was the daughter of James C. Turocek, a brave Vietnam War veteran and honorable surgeon in the U.S. Air Force. Possessed a resilient spirit as a child. While the specifics of Terry's mother, Marlene Elsikish, are still unknown, her father, James, was the epitome of a loving father to Terry despite his tough exterior as a military man. The fact that Terry wasn't an only child is well known. A few years later after her birth, her younger brother, James Turocek Jr., joined the family, and the two of them quickly developed a strong and close bond that lasted well into adulthood. As time unfolded, accepted motherhood with grace. She graciously with a man named Douglas in Oakland in 1979, and the couple was blessed with 3 kids. Her kids' names are unknown, but one thing was undeniable. Terry was a fantastic mother. James Jr. often recalled her maternal tendencies. Terry was always praised for the attention and love she gave to her children. As the years passed, Terry separated from her husband and had made a home at 1900 East 17th Avenue in Denver, Colorado. She had a complicated love life. Although she was in a primary relationship, there were rumors that she was open to other options. Terry's life was in a stable period with friends, family, and the typical ups and downs. She was maximizing her lifetime, but because of the rise and fall of life, it is impossible to predict what lies ahead. Therefore, no one could have predicted that Terry's happy times were coming to an end. Denver's residents appeared to be going about their daily lives on Friday, October 4, 1996, unaware of the impending tragedy. Terry Turocek completed her day at work and left for home with the intention of spending the evening with friends. She relished the solitude of her empty apartment while her kids were away. She got ready to partake in Denver's exciting nightlife as dusk fell. Around 8 o'clock, left her apartment, Her spirit coexisted peacefully with the city's spirit. There are traces of Terry's night scattered here and there. Around 11:30 p.m., a neighbor saw Terry coming home. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, but time and events have a way of taking everyone by surprise. The next day, on Saturday, October 5th, the early morning sun casts long shadows over Terry's apartment building, which had become silent. Strangely, Terry's apartment door remained open. After hours passed, a worried neighbor didn't see the open door until the noon sun reached its highest point. He might have assumed she had overslept or that she was taking the shower. Just to be sure, he peered into Terry's apartment and shouted out her name, but he heard no response despite his voice resonating throughout the living room. Terry was nowhere to be found when a quick search of the living room and kitchen was conducted. The neighbor then made an attempt to do a last stop at her bedroom. He, however, couldn't believe what he saw when he arrived. Terry, who he had just seen the previous evening when she was vivacious and alive, now laid lifeless on the floor of her bedroom. His fear increased. He scrambled for his phone as he hurried outside and dialed 911. His voice trembled in shock as he spoke to the operator. Police sirens could be heard in the distance, getting louder and louder until there was a discord outside Terry's apartment. Police officers who had mastered composure intervened to take control while masking their internal dread. The scene, which featured a life lost too soon, a shocked community, and a family left in agony, was all too common. When Terry Turochak's body was found, her case was launched immediately. The entire community was affected, not just her family. Detectives from the Denver Police Department led the investigation to find out what caused this sinister discovery. They understood the significance of the scene in front of them right away. The bedroom depicts a violent story. There were obvious indications of a struggle, suggesting that Terry had fought hard for her life. In an effort to fill in the blanks of that fateful night, neighbors mentioned disturbances between 1 o'clock and 1:30 am. The door to Terry's apartment was obviously left open, a spooky invitation to the horror inside, but nobody had reported seeing anyone leave. Detectives speculated that the perpetrator might have known Terry or had gained her trust in order to take advantage of it in the most wicked way. Given that there was no sign of forced entry, the medical examiner, Dr. T. Henry, had the grim duty of looking over Terry's body. The outcomes were unexpected. Terry had been severely assaulted in addition to being killed. Her death was attributed to strangulation, but there was also evidence of blunt force trauma, making for a horrifying end to a life that had otherwise been full of promise. A hair found on Terry's thighs stood out as detectives searched Terry's body. They hoped that this small strand of hair would hold the key to discovering who killed her. Investigators connected with Terry's friends and neighbors to piece together the story, and it didn't take long for perplexing tidbits of information to start to emerge. Around 11:30 p.m., Terry was last seen entering her apartment, and a neighbor noticed she wasn't alone. She was accompanied by an African-American man with a unique afro. It was unknown if he was a friend or enemy, but he was the last person seen with Terry. The timeline was further complicated when a different neighbor reported hearing noises coming from Terry's apartment around 12:30 a.m. It's interesting to note that Terry was observed knocking on another neighbor's door at 1 o'clock a.m., appearing to be hurt and pleading, asking for money. Could this be connected to the man she was seen earlier with, Terry's boyfriend, whose identity was kept private, provided the information that was the most revealing? While he had a story from the week before that raised questions, he had an alibi for the night of the murder. Terry and her boyfriend had been robbed and assaulted inside Terry's apartment by 3 unidentified African-American men. Was this incident related to her eventual homicide in any way? The detectives were plagued by that question. The weeks that followed saw the pursuit of leads. Terry was seen with a mysterious man who later became a person of interest. Was he related to the assault from the previous week? Or was Terry's request for cash that night somehow connected to him? Despite the police's best efforts, the reliable evidence required to identify a suspect eluded them. Even though a key suspect was brought in and subjected to questioning and DNA testing, disappointment sets in when the results were revealed. It did not match his DNA. With each passing day, the community's suffering grew worse. For clarification and some semblance of justice, the neighborhood looked to the detectives. The loss of Terry left her family devastated, and they clung to the hope that the offender would be caught and punished. But as the weeks turned into months, the once shining trail started to fade. Despite their best efforts, the detectives had to face the harsh possibility that they might never catch Terry's killer. Sadly, leads that had once shown promise dwindled, and the case became unproductive. However, the cold and seemingly unsolvable case experienced a sudden and unexpected resurgence in 2004. Time's fails, which had concealed clues and obscured the way to justice, were now starting to lift. Nearly 10 years after the horrifying incident, in August of that year, there was a significant development. The hit was detected by the CODIS DNA system, a comprehensive database that contains DNA profiles from all over the country. It matched the DNA evidence that had been taken years earlier from Terry's body. For the investigators, this DNA had always been a loose end, a piece of the puzzle that wouldn't fit anywhere. But now there was a lead. The investigation into this reopened case was given to Detective Dixie, an experienced detective. She was determined to follow this new lead and see where the investigation would go, and this DNA trail led them right to Ricky Dawson, thanks to her analytical mind and methodical approach. Ricky had experience with the law. His DNA was already present in the CODIS database, which suggested that he had a criminal history. An African-American man named Ricky Dawson unexpectedly found himself at the center of this investigation. After many years, the Terry Turochik case was once again the focus of the attention of the law enforcement community. Now that they had a new lead and a rekindled seal, it was hoped that this new lead would finally put an end to a troubling chapter in the city's past and bring justice to a person who had been wronged. With a name and a face to work with, Detective Dixie started attempting to understand the relationship between Terry and Dawson. Did they have a mutual relationship? Was there a reason behind the killing? Were there any additional pieces of proof or witnesses that the initial investigation might have missed? The case, which was once a terrifying puzzle covered in a layer of mystery, had changed into a maze of connections that were just waiting to be explored. As Detective Dixie dug deeper, it became clear that the task at hand was to confirm the DNA match, establish the story, and create a solid case against the new prime suspect. The Denver streets, where rumors and theories about the case once circulated, now awaited news over the case. They eagerly anticipated the day when they would declare Terry had received justice. The majority of the city was upbeat, but there were still many obstacles to be overcome. Although compelling, DNA evidence is not the be-all and end-all of a criminal case. Finding a suspect is one thing, but establishing their guilt beyond a reasonable doubt is quite another. On January 24, 1961, in Florida, Ricky Dawson, a man whose life seemed to contain both darkness and light, was born. In 2004, he was 43 years old. It indicates that he was 35 at the time of Terry Turochik's tragic death in 1996. Terry wasn't his only link to the dark, though. Dawson had his own difficulties when he was younger. There were complications throughout his childhood. It's been said that a person's behavior as a child often provides a window into their future, and Ricky was no exception. His marital status, education, and other personal information are still unknown, but his criminal record is one thing that stands out. The criminal activity that Dawson is involved in is not just in Terry's case. His DNA was discovered to match an unnamed profile from a terrifying case that occurred in Seattle in 2000. Debbie Cascio, a 40-year-old woman, was his victim. The tragic circumstances surrounding Terry's death and Debbie's are similar. Like Terry, Debbie had multiple blunt force traumas and was in pain. Debbie was strangled and had multiple blunt force injuries like Terry as well. The unfortunate relationship between the two women and Ricky Dawson attracted the attention of the law. Once more, the city and Debbie's devoted daughter, Tabitha Johnson, both worked to preserve her memory. As a gesture by the Homeless Remembrance Project to ensure Debbie's story is never forgotten, a leaf of remembrance at the Seattle Justice Center bears her name. Tabitha, who was only 11 years old when her mother died, has been a model of tenacity. She recalls memories of her mother, including times spent at the beach or creating art with glass. Even after becoming a mother herself, Tabitha is still grieving Debbie's loss. Despite her desire for closure and justice, the specifics of her mother's case are still unknown because the Seattle police haven't disclosed more information. The criminal activities of Ricky Dawson continued beyond Seattle and Denver. In 2004, he ended up in Florida's police custody. At that time, Denver police learned that a DNA match connected him to the 1996 Terry Turochik cold case. While in Florida, he admitted guilt to second-degree murder in exchange for a 25-year prison term. Now he is charged with first-degree murder in connection with the Terry Turochik case in Denver. The investigation into Terry Turochik's murder accelerated as soon as Ricky Dawson's name appeared. Detectives searched for any mention of Ricky in the case files and interview transcripts from the initial investigation. Although they weren't able to find his name right away, they were in for a surprise. Ricky's description of the man Harry was with the night she was killed matched that provided by her neighbors. Ricky's criminal history was quickly revealed and it was shocking. He was a persistent offender. His name was associated with a long list of crimes. Detectives recognized him as a key suspect in Terry Turchak's case and knew they needed to speak with him. At the Swanee Correctional Facility in Florida, where Ricky Dawson was already incarcerated, they came face to face with him in December 2004. Finding out what Ricky knew about Terry and proving his involvement in her tragic demise were detectives' stated objectives. During the interview, another intriguing lead emerged. A friend of Ricky's whose name was withheld gave his account about the night Terry was killed. Terry was well acquainted with Ricky's friend. He acknowledged spending time in her apartment with her and Ricky and even confirmed being there the night she was reported killed. He claimed that all three of them had used drugs. Even though he said he left at midnight, he wasn't aware of what happened next. The puzzle was beginning to come together. A path had now been set out in front of the detectives. They performed an important DNA test. The new DNA samples obtained from Ricky were compared to the major DNA profile of the hair discovered on Terry's body, and there was a match. With this concrete proof, Ricky Dawson's involvement in Terry's death was established. But unexpectedly, no charges were brought against him for her killing right away. Some speculated that this was because Ricky had already served about 20 years of his current sentence. As a result, Terry's case sat idle for more than 10 more years. 14 years later, a new hope for justice surfaced. Detective John McGrail from the Denver Police Cold Case Unit was tasked with reviewing the case. McGrail examined the case's details and came to the conclusion that the evidence present was quite convincing. In some ways, the case appeared to be settled. In order to cover all bases, he decided to submit the evidence for additional laboratory testing in December 2018. This included evidence gathered from the crime scene and Terry's post-mortem examination results. By August 2019, the DNA evidence findings had produced a solid match. The wheels of justice began to turn more quickly. Ricky Dawson, the Ricky who had been serving time in Florida's prison for a different crime, was the only person in whom the puzzle pieces pointed. With the fresh evidence in hand, it was obvious that it was time to hold Dawson accountable for the murder of Terry. Time travel to January 26, 2023, which was an important day in the investigation. Ricky Dawson was officially charged with the first-degree murder of Terry Turchak, and an arrest warrant was issued for him. At the age of 62, Ricky discovered himself in a more difficult legal situation. Even though he was already detained in Florida, justice did not stand still. The Denver Police Department obtained his extradition so that he could answer for his actions in Denver. On February 23rd, when Ricky learned of the allegations against him, the seriousness of the situation hit him. March 23rd, 2023 was designated as the date of the court appearance, which was eagerly anticipated. Many people anticipate Ricky Dawson will be found guilty for his role in Terry's tragic death. Despite the fact that the court's final decision has not yet been made public, they felt this way because of the mounting evidence against him. James Turchak, Terry's brother, never fully recovered from the pain of losing his sister in 1996. He struggled for 27 long years, torn between hope and despair, wondering if Terry's premature death would ever bring about justice. James, however, was overcome by a wave of emotions after hearing the recent news of an arrest in relation to the murder of his sister. James spoke to the media about his unwavering dedication to his sister's case and how he had always held on to the hope that the truth would eventually surface. James became more aware of the seriousness of the situation when he learned that the alleged offender was being extradited to stand trial. He addressed the hole Terry's absence had left, calling it an irreplaceable loss that time would never fill. He often pondered the life experiences she passed up, particularly the joy of becoming a grandmother. James finally recalled that Terry had a contagious spirit that affected everyone she knew. James acknowledged that despite having a desire for forgiveness, he is still working on it. It is a challenging journey because the pain is still too recent. Above all else, he made clear that he wanted justice to win. James wants to see Terry's memory honored by the justice she deserved 52 years ago, by making sure Ricky Dawson faces the full force of the law and is imprisoned for the rest of his days. Michael Haight was born on January 7, 1980 in Seattle, Washington, and later moved to Cedar City, Utah, with his family after his father finished dental school. As a child, Michael was very active and enjoyed playing sports like baseball, basketball, and soccer. He also excelled in school and achieved the rank of Eagle Scout. After graduating from high school in 1998, Michael worked at a fish plant in Alaska for the summer, where he quickly proved himself as a leader, rising to the position of line manager and overseeing a team of over a dozen men. This experience showcased his strong work ethic and dedication. Michael then embarked on a mission trip to South Brazil with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which deepened his faith and commitment to his religious community. When he returned to the United States, he pursued a business degree at Southern Utah University, graduating in 2004. During his time at the university, Michael met his future wife, Tasha Earle, and they fell in love. They got married in the St. George Temple on May 10, 2003. Michael appeared to be a devoted husband and father, often spending quality time with his family at sports events, school concerts, and working on projects together in the garage. On January 4, 2023, a shocking discovery was made at the Haight residence in Enoch. 8 bodies were found, leaving investigators and neighbors stunned. The events leading up to this gruesome finding began when Tasha Haight missed an online appointment and her husband Michael failed to show up for work. Their concerned colleagues contacted the police to perform a welfare check at the Haight residence. When officers arrived, they knocked on the door but received no response. As they surveyed the property, it seemed empty. Considering the Haights had 5 children, the police reached out to the Iron County School District to check if any of the kids were in school that day. However, it was found that none of the children were present. Before entering the home, the police cleared the premises to ensure it was safe to do so. After a thorough search, authorities confirmed that no one required medical attention, and there was no active threat. The Haight's single-story residence with a basement was declared a crime scene, and detectives arrived shortly after. In the main bedroom, detectives found 4-year-old Gavin lying on his stomach. His head turned to the left, with one arm under his head on a pillow and a blanket covering part of his body. Tasha, Gavin's mother, was also partially covered by the blanket. On the other side of the bed, detectives found an older woman, later identified as Gail Earle, Tasha's mother, lying on her back with her head resting on a pillow and partially covered by a blanket, similar to her daughter and grandson. In Bree's room, the 12-year-old girl was found lying in bed, slightly inclined and partially covered with a blanket. In Amon's room, a 7-year-old boy was found lying face down in the corner, without a pillow or blanket. His twin sister Sienna was discovered in her bedroom, lying on her left side in bed, with her head on a pillow and covered with a blanket. The eldest child, 17-year-old Macy, was found in her bed, with her head on a pillow and her body covered with a blanket. In the exercise room of the basement, the detectives found Michael Haight lying on top of a sleeping bag. Sadly, all 8 family members were found dead from gunshot wounds. It quickly became clear to the detectives that Michael Haight was the main suspect, and they believed he had killed his wife, mother-in-law, and 5 children before taking his own life. When detectives started investigating, a neighbor provided vital information that helped them reconstruct the crime's timeline. The neighbor told police she woke up at 3:30 a.m. to use the bathroom, and as she left her room, heard a loud bang that sounded like fireworks. However, realizing it was after the allowed date for fireworks in the neighborhood, she felt annoyed rather than alarmed by the noise. The neighbor reported hearing an initial loud bang, followed by 2 more in quick succession, then a short pause, another bang, and a longer pause before the final bang. Based on this testimony and the condition of the 8 bodies found inside the house, the detective inferred that the loud noises heard around 3:30 a.m. were directly connected to the events that unfolded that night, leading them to believe that Michael Haight committed the brutal killings during this time frame. During the investigation into the Haight family murders, detectives discovered a 2020 report from an unnamed individual who had notified the Utah Division of Child and Family Services about abuse in the Haight household. According to the report, 14-year-old Macy had confided in this individual about her fear of her father, sparking a further investigation. The authorities then interviewed Macy and her parents separately. During Macy's interview, she revealed disturbing information. Her father had choked her on multiple occasions, and she lived in fear of being killed by him. She reported that the violent attacks began in 2017 and recounted an incident where her father grabbed her by the shoulders and pushed her into a wooden piece of furniture. Michael Haight denied hurting his daughter when questioned by detectives, passing off the incidents as misunderstandings and attributing his emotional state to his father's recent death and his brother's divorce. He claimed to have taken out his frustrations on his older daughter. Despite this, Tasha chose not to press charges, and the Utah Department of Children and Family Services, the Enoch Police Department, and the Iron County Prosecutor's Office also declined to pursue the case, as it did not meet the legal requirements for prosecution. A lethality assessment was conducted with Tasha, which indicated that her relationship with Michael was not life-threatening. As a result, victim services were made available to Tasha and her children for several months. Further investigation revealed a different side of Michael, unknown to the community. According to Tasha's friends, they had to speak quietly or turn on the kitchen water when visiting Tasha, as they suspected Michael was monitoring and eavesdropping on their conversations. Tasha's friends would often help her clean the house when they visited, which prevented Michael from finding fault with her. When texting Tasha, her friends noticed that she would respond with brief, positive messages, likely to maintain a positive image in case Michael read them. This suggested that everything was fine in their marriage. The detectives investigating the case discovered that Michael exhibited highly controlling behavior towards Tasha. For instance, he would take away her car keys and phone to restrict her freedom. Another red flag was his overreaction when Tasha bought a $30 rug from Walmart to replace a dirty one, which was a legitimate need. Michael's anger was unwarranted, and he claimed the purchase was excessive. Tasha confided in her friends that her 7-year-old son, Aman, was increasingly imitating Michael's bad behavior. When Tasha gave Aman instructions, he would respond, which concerned Tasha as it showed his lack of responsibility and disregard for authority. Tasha's friends reported that in 2022, Tasha attempted to prioritize her own well-being by getting her nails done, a rare treat for her given her many responsibilities. However, her husband Michael refused to let her do so, imposing strict limits on her autonomy and freedom. Moreover, Michael frequently disregarded or ignored Tasha's instructions, and their friend Aman often followed his lead in doing so. Tasha felt more confident in her appearance after indulging herself, and she decided to get her nails done every month. However, Michael was unhappy about this decision and expressed his disapproval, worried about the cost. Tasha explained that it would only cost $25 per month, but Michael was unconvinced, arguing that the money could be better spent on their children. Michael's reaction was rooted in his need for control and sense of financial responsibility towards their family. Around the same time, Tasha started prioritizing her self-care and began losing weight, which had been a sensitive topic for her since Michael had often called her fat and ugly. However, instead of being supportive, Michael became furious and accused Tasha of cheating on him, trying to explain the sudden change in her appearance. Michael's controlling behavior escalated as he tried to manipulate Tasha's weight loss, pleading with her to stop losing weight because he was worried that other men might find her attractive. This demand was driven by his own insecurities and desire for complete control over Tasha's body and behavior. Tasha's friends also told the police about an incident where the kitchen table broke, and Tasha needed to buy a new one. However, Michael refused to give her the money, further demonstrating his controlling behavior. Tasha was fed up with the old table and decided to take initiative by refinishing it to make it look better and more functional. However, Michael was unhappy with her decision because she didn't ask for his permission first. Michael was extremely frugal during the holiday season. Despite earning a good income, he only gave Tasha $100 for each of their 5 children to buy presents, which was not enough in Tasha's opinion. Tasha always made sure her children had a wonderful Christmas, but Michael refused to provide more funds, claiming that he worked hard for his money and saw no reason to give more to his family. He believed that his income was rightfully his alone. Michael's passion for reducing waste and conserving resources led him to implement strict rules on household habits. He forced Tasha to wash and reuse plastic bags, even if they had been used only once or multiple times. This excessive demand for reusing bags added to Tasha's responsibilities, leaving her feeling burdened and overwhelmed. Michael's controlling behavior extended to every aspect of Tasha's life, including her daily routines. For instance, he demanded that she use baby wipes for cleaning, claiming it was better for the environment and more cost-effective. However, this requirement caused Tasha discomfort, hygiene issues, and unnecessary stress. If Tasha failed to follow Michael's instructions, she would face severe consequences, which he made clear would lead to serious trouble. This threat instilled fear and submission in Tasha, leaving her no choice but to obey Michael's demands. Natasha confided in her friends that while Michael had been cruel to her throughout their marriage, he had never directed this cruelty towards their children until the late 2010s. However, over time, the abuse towards their daughter Macy escalated, driving her to consider suicide. Michael had unrealistically high expectations for his daughter Macy, demanding she earn perfect grades despite her struggles, which were exacerbated by the emotional burden of his abusive behavior. This pressure was crushing for Macy. Macy's friends shared a disturbing incident with the detective. One evening, Michael returned home to find Macy comforted by her mother. He became enraged and ordered Macy to clean her room. This event left Macy deeply disturbed, remembering the hatred and evil she saw in her father's eyes. The detectives also discovered an incident where 7-year-old Briley disobeyed Michael while playing with a changing table. Michael responded by blaming his wife Tasha for their children's behavior, calling them the worst and most disrespectful in the world. He then humiliated Tasha, calling her fat and ugly in front of their 5 children. This painful incident prompted Tasha to plan her escape and file for divorce after 20 years of marriage. Tasha realized she had to leave her husband Michael after witnessing his abusive behavior and lack of self-control. She knew staying in the marriage would negatively impact her children, and their well-being was more important than her marital commitment. In December 2022, Tasha filed for divorce but asked for the papers to be delivered after Christmas to give her children one last normal holiday before the separation. When Michael received the papers, he tried to act normal, but Tasha saw through it. He told her to leave the children behind, but she refused, taking them to her mother's home in Lynn, Utah. Michael showed up at his mother-in-law's house, trying to convince Tasha to go for a ride with him, but she refused, sensing danger. After filing for divorce, Tasha's mother moved in to support her and the children. However, Michael's actions worsened the situation. He refused to leave the family home, instead moving into the basement. Tasha discovered he had secretly transferred $220,000 from their children's savings accounts without her knowledge or consent. She also found that her inherited firearms were missing, leaving her family vulnerable. The couple's children, Macy and Briley, were affected by the constant drama at home. Macy had a secret phone to record her father's outbursts as evidence for the divorce, while Briley found solace at a neighbor's house. Both girls were relieved about their parents' divorce. On January 3, 2023, Tasha met with her attorney, expressing concerns about her divorce and Michael's volatile behavior. Although she had relocated him to the basement, the attorneys pressed her about feeling safe. Tasha reassured them she never feared for her or her children's well-being. But in hindsight, her optimism was tragically misplaced. A disturbing discovery emerged from the digital evidence found on the family's computers and cell phones. Just days before the tragic shooting, Michael made a series of concerning Google searches on December 30th at 10:41 p.m. These searches focused on firearms and shooting-related topics, revealing his sinister intentions. The search results showed Michael had asked alarming questions such as the loudness of a 9mm gunshot and what a gunshot sounds like. Before taking his own life, Michael wrote a note expressing his desire to end the controlling behavior he felt he was subjected to by his wife. He stated that he couldn't handle the situation for another day and wanted to escape the manipulation. Michael's note conveyed deep frustration and desperation, as he repeatedly asked for help but felt ignored. He emphasized his determination not to be a burden to society. The details of this case have left many in shock, revealing a deeply dysfunctional family plagued by violence. Michael's actions were premeditated and calculated as he carefully planned the murders to catch his. Today's case takes us to Setagaya, Tokyo. Setagaya is a serene suburban-style residential community. It is located not far from central Tokyo. It is made up of cultural amenities like art museums, libraries, and many parks. Setagaya is also renowned for having a large number of upscale residential areas. The city is popular with young people and filled with trendy coffee shops, adorable bookstores, and student pubs. The Miyazawa family was a joyful family of 4 who resided in Setagaya. They were a quiet, typical suburban family. In December of 2000, the Miyazawa family had planned to spend New Year's Eve at home, enjoying a quiet evening, cooking a special meal and anticipating the coming year. Mikio, the father and the head of the family, was a 44-year-old businessman who worked in corporate identity development for Interbrand, a London-based international media and marketing company with branches in 19 cities around the world. Since it was a remote job, Mikio worked from home and had a private study on the ground floor, which he used as his office. Yasuko, his wife, was 41 years old and was a popular teacher who enjoyed her job and was well respected by her students, their parents, and her co-workers. Mikio and Yasuko had 2 children named Nina and Rei. Nina was their 8-year-old daughter and Rei, their son, who had speech defect, was just 6 years old at the time of their murder. The Miyazawa family occupied a duplex, a sizable house that had been divided in 2. The other half of the house at the time was being resided by Yasuko's mother, Ashawi Jino. The duplex was close to Sashigaya Park, which has walking paths, sports fields, a children's playground after settling into their house in 1990. The Miyazawa family fell in love with the lifestyle it provided. However, a few years later, the government decided to turn the area into a park for recreation and purchased all the nearby homes to make room for the project. The government already bought around 200 homes, but the Miyazawa family was one of just 3 households that were still in the area in December 2000. At the time, the area looks deserted, and according to reports, the Miyazawa family planned to move out the following year, in 2001. Even though there weren't many people living in the area anymore, the skate park at Sashigaya Park next to their house grew increasingly busy. Even outside their home, Mikio had to reprimand some rowdy teenagers for disturbing them. Additionally, he confronted Bazoku biker gang members for being too loud. He was obviously very stressed due to the inrush of people. At the time of the murder, the older sister of Yasuko was in Japan with her husband, eager to spend the new year with her family, even though she worked and resided in the UK. They stayed with their mother next door to Yasuko and her family throughout the visit. Around 10 a.m. on the December 31st, 2000, Yasuko's mother, Asahi, attempted to call the Miyazawa residence, but the call was unsuccessful. Despite the fact that they shared a door, they respected each other's privacy and never paid a surprise visit. Asahi made several calls in an attempt to get through to her daughter and her family, but nobody would pick up. According to her, they very rarely ignored calls. She then made the decision to go around and check on them. She noticed their car in the driveway, but when she knocked, no one answered the door. She then attempted to enter the house, but the door was locked. She returned to her residence to get her own key, before returning to let herself in. What she discovered was a gruesome scene. The entire family had been brutally murdered in a horrific way. Firstly, she discovered the body of her son-in-law, Mikio, on the floor. He appeared to have fallen down the stairs, based on the position of his body and the multiple stab wounds on his neck. The terrified grandmother hurried upstairs to find her daughter and grandchildren. At the top of the stairs, she discovered Yasuko and Nina dead, lying in their own pool of blood. Both had been repeatedly and savagely stabbed. Yasuko's mother ran to her grandson's room in the hopes of finding him alive, but he was also dead, strangled in his bed. It was truly a traumatizing scene to witness. Asahi was terrified and confused at the same time. She frantically dialed the police's number, pleading with them to arrive as soon as possible. The house was in a mess when the police arrived at the crime scene. There were numerous documents lying around, and it appeared that someone had slept on the couch in the living room. A chest of drawers with each drawer open and papers sticking out of them was located behind Mikio's body. Investigators discovered a missing drawer in the bathroom with all of its contents in the bathtub. They also found garbage and bloodied bandages in the bathtub, which was an odd collection of items to throw in a tub. Police discovered 150,000 yen in cash as well as foreign currency worth 5,000 yen in Mikio's study. The only thing missing was Mikio's old jacket. It's possible that the murderer fled the scene wearing Mikio's jacket because he left behind his bloody clothes. Nothing else was missing, so robbery could not have been the reason for the killings since nothing else was missing. Police discovered a screen that had been cut and taken out of a window in the second-floor bathroom while searching through the entire duplex. The bathroom was located towards the back of the house and could be reached from the fence between the property and the park. In light of the fact that all other doors and windows were locked and closed, this appeared to be the most likely point of entry. Footprints on the wall below the window were visible from the outside as well. As you walk from the bathroom, the kid's bedroom was the first room on the right. According to the police, Ray was sleeping in the room on the bunk bed he shared with his sister when the killer entered and strangled the child to death. Most likely noticing movement upstairs, Mikio went to see if his son was alright. He was pushed down the stairs after being stabbed with a sashimi knife at the top of the stairs. The next victim was young Nina. The murderer discovered her in bed with her mother on the 3rd floor, which could only be accessed by a drop ladder. He attacked her but stopped midway through the attack when he realized that the sashimi knife's tip had come off while he was attacking Mikio. Yasuko and Nina likely believed the attacker had left at this point, so they descended the ladder to the spot where Mikio was attacked. Yasuko did her best to save her daughter by going to get the first aid kit. However, the murderer was not finished. He returned with one of their kitchen knives and discovered them at the top of the stairs, where he killed both mother and daughter. Yasuko and Nina sustained the most brutal assaults out of the 4 murders. According to forensics, after they both were already dead, their attacker kept stabbing them repeatedly. Yasuko was said to have made a valiant effort to fight off the attacker, desperately trying to protect her daughter from him, as evident by the wounds on her body. However, the killer was unfazed and saw that the job was completed. The perpetrator cut his hand during the attack and bandaged it with supplies from the family's first aid kit. In order to stop the bleeding, he had also used sanitary pads he discovered in the restroom. After he was done with his heinous crime, the killer comfortably remained in the house, which had been a happy family home just hours earlier. He drank some barley tea and ate some melon and ice cream from their refrigerator. He slept on their couch, used their toilet without flushing, and unplugged their phone. He also attempted to use Mikio's credit card to purchase theater tickets at 1:18 a.m. after logging onto the family computer. However, he did not finish the transaction because he lacked all the necessary security details. He went on to set up browser bookmarks for the websites of the business Mikio worked for and the institution Yasuko worked for as well. The police discovered activity on the computer at 10 a.m. on the morning of December 31st, though it wasn't clear if the killer stayed online all night or if he logged in again the following morning. Police believed they could not rule out the possibility that Ashi accidentally touched the computer when she entered the house at 10:55 a.m. Chances are, if it wasn't her, then the murderer had already left before she arrived. The murder weapon, the sashimi knife, and the kitchen knife were both left on the kitchen table before the killer left. At the crime scene, there was a ton of forensic evidence. Nina's blood and the murderer's blood were found on the first aid kit. Additionally, the killer had failed to flush the toilet and left feces floating in it. He left his hit bag behind. It contained sand that could be traced to the United States. The detectives were able to follow the sand traces all the way to a particular spot. It landed them at the vicinity of Nevada's Edwards Air Force Base. Also, a roll of tape, which skateboarders frequently used to fix their boards, was found in the hip bag. Lastly, the hip bag contained a folded iron handkerchief with traces of French cologne that was popular among skaters then. There were numerous footprints all over the house, which offered intriguing hints. The perpetrator was wearing Slazenger shoes, but they were never sold in Japan, in the exact size he was wearing. That size was in fact only available in South Korea. He had gloves, but he didn't use them because his prints were all over the place. Actually, forensic experts were able to extract a full set of fingerprints from material evidence discovered around the house. He also abandoned his blood-stained clothing. His clothes, however, were left at the scene neatly folded, in contrast to the way he left the drawers, documents, and ice cream cups. Unlike the soft water in Japan, the clothes had been washed in hard water with a higher mineral content. The water used was typical in Korea though. The purchase of the sweater the killer wore and the knife he used was tracked by the police to the Kanagawa prefecture. Only 130 of the identical sweaters were ever sold, but only 12 of the owners could be located by police. So, if the sweater was bought in Japan but washed in Korea, could it be that the murderer resided in Japan but visited Korea before the killings? Maybe the sweater hadn't been washed in Japan since he bought it because it was made in Korea? The blood found at the scene of the crime was used to create a genetic profile, which revealed that the unidentified suspect was mixed race. The killer's father was East Asian, while his mother was of Southern European ancestry. DNA revealed a unique gene sequence that can only be found in people of Chinese, Korean, or Japanese ancestry. 1 in 5 men of Korean descent, 1 in 10 Chinese men, and 1 in 13 Japanese men fit this type of profile. Detectives believed the theory that the murderer was a foreigner. Accepting that such a monster was not from your country was simpler. Despite sending investigators to Korea to work with local law enforcement on the case, the Korean government was unable to assist in identifying the murderer. In recent years, the idea that the murderer was Korean has gained popularity. The likelihood that the murderer was Japanese was only 1 in 13. He might also have been a Korean Japanese of the first or second generation. The Korean expat community and the diplomatic community were among the areas of Japan where investigators searched for a person of mixed race. Perhaps the maternal European connection could have offered some information. However, neither the killer's DNA nor fingerprints could be found on anyone. Police questioned whether the murderer might have been a member of the military due to the source of the sand in the hip bag. Could he have been a second-generation Korean Japanese or Chinese-American citizen? Given that U.S. forces have been stationed in Japan since the end of World War II, despite the abundance of evidence, police were unable to identify the murderer. In an effort to identify anyone who might have had a reason to kill the Miyazawa family, they went back to the investigative board and looked at their connections and relatives. However, the victims' loved ones and friends had no idea who would want to murder them. They were well liked by the locals and had no known enemies. At the nearby skate park, Mikio warned skaters for being too loud, and that was it. It undoubtedly wasn't a good enough excuse to brutally murder a man and his family. According to forensic evidence found in the killer's faces that were left in the toilet, he had consumed sesame seeds and string beans, a dish that is very popular in Japan and is typically made at home. This must have been consumed by the murderer prior to the killings because it was not consumed at the Miyazawa residence. Police took into account the possibility that the killer still resided with his mother. A timeline of the incidents leading up to the terrible night was created by the investigators. There were numerous reports of animals being killed and dismembered in the park next to the family's residence, just 6 months prior to the murders. In August 2000, locals discovered that a cat had been skinned. Police were able to identify the perpetrator of the animal abuse later on in the investigation. He worked as a bank clerk and his actions had nothing to do with the murders of the Miyazawa family. Few days before the murders, Yasuko had informed her father-in-law on December 25th that a strange car occasionally parked in front of their home. A car had no business being there because the park's entrance was on the other side of the fence. They also discovered a strange man wandering around the house 2 days later. Local residents claimed to have seen a strange man on December 29th wandering through the neighborhood shops. He was dressed in skater gear and was in his late 30s or early 40s. They noticed that he was wearing the same clothes that were discovered at the crime scene. This seemed strange, especially given the season. He did not appear to be dressed warmly enough. According to one of the shop owners, the man purchased a sashimi knife, which was the only knife sold that day. Strangely, the forensics identified the knife as the same knife the killer had used. A neighbor of the Miyazawa family saw the same man walking around their house again the following day. Everyone had left the house to go shopping, so nobody was home. The witness described the unknown person in detail, telling police that he was wearing a gray wool hat with a black stripe. He was wearing gloves, a long-sleeve t-shirt, a hip bag, a colorful scarf, a black Uniqlo jacket and white Slazenger shoes. After the killings, the majority of these items were discovered in the Miyazawa residence. On the evening of December 30th, Yasuko called her mother at 7 o'clock to let her know that they had just returned home. Her mother then asked if the children were interested in coming over to watch television. Nina, the older child, loved the idea while Rie preferred to stay at home. Nina spent a few hours with her grandmother next door before leaving between 9 and 9:30 p.m. to go to bed. The family computer was used for the last known activity in the Miyazawa residence at 10:38 p.m. Mikio opened a work email that was password protected. He is the only person who is likely to have known the password to open the email. A neighbor overheard a fight inside the Miyazawa's house at 11 o'clock while he was taking a stroll in the park. It sounded more like a husband and wife arguing than like a physical altercation. A loud thud was heard in the other half of the building next door. Around 11:30 p.m. by Asahi and Yasuko's sister, they were both watching television while still awake. Another witness observed a man leaving the house quickly around the same time. When Asahi arrived after 10 a.m. the following morning, she reported to the police that the light on the ground floor and in the entrance hallway was on. However, the light, according to a paperboy who delivered papers at the Miyazawa's doorstep on the morning of 31st, was not on. A taxi driver came forward after the murder and admitted to the police that he had picked up 3 middle-aged men close to the Miyazawa family home. According to him, the silence in the car was unsettling, almost too quiet. The driver said there was blood on the back seat when they exited and one of the men was hurt. Another tip came in again soon after. A young man visited a clinic on December 31st, about 70 miles north of the Miyazawa family home. His hand had been cut so deeply that his bone was exposed. Medical personnel were treating the wound. The man was described by staff as being very composed and not showing much concern for his injury. Given how serious the wound was, they thought his behavior was odd. The man was described as being in his 30s, wearing a black down jacket and jeans. He left the center without giving any information, not even a name or an address. Only later in the investigation was this tip determined to be significant. Police initially believed that the murderer had left the scene in the middle of the night, but after processing the crime scene and receiving the results of the blood tests, they came to the conclusion that he had actually left in the morning, just before Asahi arrived. Numerous months had passed by the time the data from the medical center was analyzed and police were still without any leads on the man. In 2018, Tokyo police made information about their suspect public in the hopes that someone would be able to assist in prosecuting him. The information determined that the perpetrator was a young man between the ages of 15 and 20, based on all the evidence discovered at the crime scene. He stands at 170 centimeters tall, and they were able to determine that he is right-handed by looking at the victim's knife wounds. He might have been a drifter or an undocumented immigrant, which would account for why he was impossible to find. The police speculated that the murderer might have been the son of a diplomat, a soldier, or the son of a wealthy local family who may have been one of the skaters who fought with Mikio in the months before the killings, because it was determined that he was younger than 30 to 40 years old. 250,000 police officers worked on the case in the months following the murders. In Japan, violent home invasions are extremely uncommon, so authorities were determined to apprehend the murderer. Police were never able to identify the murderer, despite all the available evidence. 40 officers are still working the case today, reviewing case files and repeating witness interviews. They frequently distribute flyers with details about the killer's attire and appearance at train stations close to the Miyazawa's residence in the hopes that someone will come forward with fresh information. Tokyo Metropolitan Police Department has offered a 20 million yen reward to anyone who can assist them in solving this 23-year-old mystery. Every year, police gather at the Miyazawa home to pay their respects to the family and make a commitment to never give up on the effort to find their killer. The house is now a family mausoleum for the Miyazawas, boarded up and vacant. The building was recently targeted for demolition by the local council, but the family refused to let that happen. This is such a sad case. It's disturbing how the police haven't still found the perpetrator, even with all the evidence at hand. Friends, what do you think about this case? Please share your ideas and theories about this case with me in the comments. Case of the Harvey family. On that Sunday afternoon in January 2006, a man and his daughter visited his friend's family home for a New Year's gathering. He found the open door a usual party thing. Entering, he saw thick smoke, alerted others, and called the authorities. Firefighters arrived, put out the fire, but tragically found the Harveys' lifeless bodies. What seemed like a fire turned into a murder investigation, leaving the investigators both shaken and perplexed. 49-year-old Brian Taba Harvey, a local icon, gained recognition in the 1980s as the singer-songwriter for the underground indie band House of Freaks. Despite parting ways professionally with his musical partner, Johnny Hott, in the 90s, they remained close friends. Brian, a devoted musician, took the stage for the last time at a New Year's Eve show, which was sadly and unbeknownst to him, the final night of his life. On the other hand, 39-year-old Catherine Elizabeth Grabinski achieved success as the co-owner of the popular toy store World of Mirth, located in Richmond's Carytown district. A community pillar, she was an artist involved in various endeavors, from painting sets for community theater to working as a pastry chef and waitress. Catherine had an older sister, Shelley Grabinski, and was also the half-sister of actor Stephen Culp, known for his roles in The West Wing and Desperate Housewives, among other films. The paths of Brian and Catherine crossed at the Border Cafe on Main Street, where Catherine worked and Brian frequently visited with Johnny. In 1990, they got married, and the House of Freaks released an album featuring a song dedicated to Catherine titled, I Got Happy. The couple welcomed 2 daughters into their lives, Stella and their first daughter, born in 1996, and Ruby May, born in 2001. While Brian continued his musical pursuits, he also took on a job working on computers for the Henrico County school system. Catherine, on the other hand, embarked on the entrepreneurial path by opening World of Mirth, a unique toy and gift store that became a cornerstone in the fashionable Carytown neighborhood. Her brother, Stephen Culp, explained in court that she wanted to create a space where parents could come with their kids and spend time, and kids could play with the toys without any toys that resembled weapons such as guns or swords. The Harvey family established their home in a stately old neighborhood on the south side of Richmond with large trees, porch swings, and ivy-covered surroundings. They had a family room in the basement of their 2-story red brick house. The beautiful family was well known and beloved in the community of Richmond, and no one really had bad intentions towards them, or so everyone thought. On New Year's Day, Sunday 2006, Brian, his wife Catherine, and their 2 daughters, 9-year-old Stella and 4-year-old Ruby, anticipated a bustling day ahead. Their plans included hosting a lunchtime barbecue for friends and family, prompting them to rise early and make preparations for the upcoming festivities. It had become a tradition for them to throw a party every New Year's Day, gathering their extensive circle of friends for the occasion. On that Sunday morning, Brian went outside their residence in the fashionable Woodland Heights area of Richmond, Virginia, to retrieve the newspaper. Absorbed in the front page news, he returned indoors without locking the door. Since they lived in a relatively safe neighborhood, this wouldn't normally have been a cause for concern. Typically, they also didn't secure the door on party days, leaving it open for arriving friends. However, on this day, unbeknownst to Brian, opportunistic criminals were secretly lurking nearby. Catherine was busily preparing cookies in the kitchen for the anticipated guests who were expected to arrive shortly. Suddenly, she heard voices emanating from the living room. Assuming someone had arrived earlier than expected, she approached the living room, only to be confronted not by familiar faces, but by two unknown men. In the tense moments that followed, Brian, Catherine, and young Ruby were directed to go downstairs to the basement playroom. Stella, who had spent the previous night at a slumber party, had not yet joined them. Once the family was confined to the small space, the intruders used electrical cords and packing tape to restrain them, ensuring their cooperation to prevent any harm as the intruders proceeded to ransack the house. Around 10 a.m., a knock on the front door interrupted them. The apparent leader of the group released Catherine from her restraints and instructed her to deal with whoever was at the door. However, before allowing her to leave, he issued a stern warning. If she sought help or attempted to escape, her daughter and husband would be murdered, as the imminent arrival of Stella was threatened. A distressed Catherine found herself in a difficult dilemma. Answering the door would expose her daughter to the same danger as the rest of the family, while ignoring the persistent knocking could incur the wrath of the assailant, who clearly had the upper hand. Ultimately, she decided that cooperation was the most prudent choice, and with that decision she opened the door. In an unexpected turn of events, Stella swiftly darted past Catherine and made her way directly to the playroom where the family usually spent a lot of time together. Acting quickly, Catherine intercepted her daughter's friend, preventing her from following. Karen Perkinson, the friend's mother, later recounted her surprise at Catherine's unusual behavior, which deviated from her typical exuberance. In response to Perkinson's inquiry about her well-being, Catherine, normally lively, claimed to be unwell and gestured with a circular motion to the side of her head, mimicking a gun, to indicate someone might be considered crazy, abruptly ending the conversation and shutting the door. This peculiar gesture would later trouble Perkinson, who wondered if Catherine was attempting to convey that Kathy was being monitored by the intruders. And could she have attempted an escape, potentially saving herself and Stella? However, the dilemma of leaving Brian and Ruby behind weighed heavily on Catherine's mind. Perkinson left, intending to return later for the party. With all four members of Harvey's family now inside the house, Catherine went back to the basement and found a terrified Stella, who had been securely tied up along with the rest of the family. As everyone lay bound and vulnerable, chaos suddenly and unexpectedly erupted. The man in charge revealed a knife taken from the Harvey's kitchen and began slashing their throats, including those of the young girls, expressing frustration that they were not dying quickly enough. He ordered his accomplice to bludgeon their heads, but the partner refused, prompting the assailant to grab a claw hammer and ruthlessly strike them repeatedly until they stopped moving. After removing Catherine Harvey's wedding ring, the assailants used wine as an accelerant to set the room on fire and conceal evidence of their heinous acts. As they made their escape from the residence, they helped themselves to a plate of freshly baked cookies that were cooling on the kitchen counter and stole a laptop, DVD player, and various other items. Rushing out, they entered a getaway vehicle parked outside, where a woman who was in a relationship with one of the men was serving as a lookout during what was initially intended as a simple robbery. They quickly departed, leaving the scene as inconspicuously as they had arrived. Sometime later, around 1:30 p.m., Johnny Holt arrived for the celebratory gathering. Upon opening the front door, he was greeted by a dense cloud of smoke pouring out. Alarmed by the strong smell of burning, he alerted the neighbors, who quickly called 911. As emergency responders entered the premises and dealt with the fire, they unfortunately found 4 bodies in the smoldering basement, still intact. Investigators at the scene soon determined that the fire did not cause the victims' deaths, but rather a more sinister cause of death was uncovered. This had now become a murder investigation. Police officers and paramedics, who were accustomed to witnessing the darkest aspects of humanity, were reportedly so distressed by the harrowing scene that some of them openly shed tears. The revelation that the parents had been forced to witness the brutal deaths of their children and vice versa was heartbreaking to imagine. Autopsies revealed that Brian and Catherine died from blunt force trauma to the head. Stella tragically succumbed to a combination of blunt force trauma and smoke inhalation, suggesting she was alive when the fire started. Despite her severe injuries, Ruby's death resulted from stab wounds to her neck and back. Despite initiating an immediate investigation into the murders, the authorities had little evidence. Recognizing the potential for criminals to divulge information, they appealed to the public for assistance. And fortunately, their breakthrough came a few days later on January 6th. A woman named Latoya Pye contacted the police, requesting them to perform a welfare check on her friend, 21-year-old Ashley Basil. Pi expressed her concerns as she believed that Ashley's boyfriend, 29-year-old Reed Joseph Dandridge, and his uncle, 29-year-old Ricky Jovan Gray, were involved in the murder of the Harvey family. Ricky, who was slightly younger than his nephew by a few months, was said to be the one in charge. The shocking revelation continued, as Pi disclosed that the two men had stored evidence of their crimes at her residence. She revealed that Gray and Dandridge had recently visited her home with a laptop that had an image of the Harveys as its wallpaper, and the Harvey case had by then received extensive coverage in the news, leaving no doubt that the laptop belonged to them. Additionally, LaToya provided detailed information about a plan devised by Ashley, Gray, and Dandridge to rob Ashley's parents. In this plan, Ashley was supposed to pretend to be a hostage, allowing Ricky and Gray to extort money from the Bossy Lay Tuckers, which would make Ashley appear innocent, even though she was aware of the entire plan and had been offered a role. LaToya declined, becoming suspicious of the trio. The uncle and nephew were the only ones that returned hours later, and when asked about Ashley's whereabouts, they cryptically replied, "Ashley has gone bye-bye." This statement heightened LaToya's concerns, prompting her to contact the police. It was this crucial information that investigators needed to start connecting the dots. Having confirmed LaToya's information, investigators proceeded to the residence where Ashley resided with her mother, 46-year-old Mary Basil Tucker, and stepfather, 55-year-old Purcell Tucker. To their horror, they encountered yet another gruesome scene. Upon entering the home, they discovered the lifeless bodies of all three victims who had been subjected to a brutal method similar to the Harvey family's fate. The victims were bound, gagged, and had their throats mercilessly slit. Duct tape wound tightly around their heads had inflicted additional suffering on Mary and Purcell, who both displayed deep neck lacerations. Purcell had a sock forcibly inserted into his throat, and Ashley tragically was found to have been suffocated with a plastic bag. The common cause of death for all three was determined to be suffocation and torture. Suspecting the presence of killers, law enforcement agencies from across the region collaborated in a joint effort to apprehend them before they could commit further atrocities. Harvey, Purcell, and Mary led quiet, peaceful lives without any known enemies. Purcell worked as a forklift operator, while Mary was employed by a housekeeping business. Their tranquil existence was shattered by the betrayal of their own daughter, which ultimately led to the tragic demise of an innocent couple who was simply trying to enjoy their retirement years. The investigators swiftly uncovered the crucial link between the Harvey and Tucker cases. Ashley was found wearing Brian Harvey's wedding band, the same one that was missing and taken from Catherine. With this revelation, urgent action was imperative to apprehend Gray and Dandridge before they could inflict further irreparable harm. They traced their movements back to their home state of Pennsylvania, and Gray and Dandridge were captured in Philadelphia on January 7th. In questioning, Dandridge asserted that the murders had been conceived by his uncle, and he had merely followed instructions. Faced with these incriminating accusations, readily admitted to the killings of the Harveys, and his involvement in those of Ashley and her parents. While these straightforward confessions were enough to leave anyone astounded, it became apparent that this was just the beginning. Gray provided gruesome, intricate details of both family massacres, emphasizing that their actions were driven solely by the need for money. During the Harvey family murders, unbeknownst to everyone, was under the influence of PCP, a drug known for inducing auditory and visual hallucinations, as well as violent behavior. Throughout his confession, Gray maintained a chilling, emotionless stare, and his utter indifference towards the lives he took led investigators to believe they were face to face with the devil incarnate. It was also revealed that Gray was responsible for the murder of his wife, Trevor Terrell Gray, whose body was uncovered in a shallow grave on Brookside Avenue in Washington, Pennsylvania. The couple had been married for 6 months prior to her tragic murder and resided together in a house owned by Trevor's family along with Gray's nephew, Rory. According to Trevor's parents, the Grays frequently engaged in bitter arguments, and claw marks on Rye's forearm were even discovered on the day Trevor's body was found. Despite being interviewed by Washington police, neither Gray nor Dandridge were initially considered suspects. Trevor's mother, Maina Squires, alleged that law enforcement assumed Trevor had succumbed to a drug overdose, leading to a lackadaisical investigation into her death. Although Trevor's demise was deemed suspicious at the time, a homicide investigation was only initiated after Gray's confession in 2006. On December 31, 2005, a brutal assault unfolded where 26-year-old Ryan Kai was attacked by 2 men in front of his parents' Arlington home, who were later identified as Gray and Dandridge. The assault left Kai with severe beating and stab wounds to the chest, neck, and arms, resulting in a near-fatal assault that caused him to spend the following 2 weeks in a coma and permanently lose the use of his right arm. On February 9, 2006, Ricky Gray faced 5 charges of capital murder, while Ray Dandridge was indicted on 3 counts of murder for his involvement in the Baskerville Tucker killings. Despite their earlier admissions, both men pleaded not guilty. After a 6-month trial, the jury found Gray guilty on all counts, leading to a life sentence for the murders of Brian and Catherine Harvey. In response to the brutal taking of Stella and Ruby's lives, the court deemed nothing less than a death sentence appropriate. In September 2006, following his uncle's conviction, and after learning the verdict in his case, Dandridge opted for a plea deal to evade the death penalty. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. In December 2006, Ricky Gray faced charges from Chesterfield County for the murder of Cheryl Warner, a 37-year-old legal secretary and mother of 3. Warner was discovered shot and hanged by an electrical cord in the basement of her Burning Beaver residence. Gray entered a not guilty plea. However, on June 4, 2008, the charge was suspended due to conflicting evidence. Over the subsequent 9 years, Gray's legal team pursued numerous appeals, primarily arguing that their client suffered from diminished capacity due to an abusive childhood. The case reached the Supreme Court, where it was summarily rejected in 2016. In November 2016, Gray was scheduled to be executed on January 18, 2017. On January 18, 2017, with all of his appeals exhausted, Ricky Gray was executed by lethal injection. Greensville Correctional Center. Ray Dandridge remains incarcerated at Sussex State Prison. The brutal murders of the Harvey family unleashed an overwhelming wave of horror and sorrow, with over 1,400 individuals attending their memorial service, expressing their condolences and grief. Flowers and dolls piled up and formed a poignant tribute along the curb outside the red brick house. Children placed candles which maintained their glow for weeks. A neighbor reflected on the community's collective mourning, stating that they kept those candles lit for weeks. Catherine's brother, Culp, testified about the profound impact of the murders, describing them as a lightning bolt to the heart that felt bottomless. He further expressed his pain in thinking about the Harvey family's last hours. In Richmond's Forest Hill Park, an entrance to a footbridge is adorned with a granite monument, a poignant dedication to the Harvey family. This family, who had previously enjoyed many joyful moments at the site, saw their lives abruptly and tragically cut short. A bronze plaque depicting their radiant smiles serves as a commemoration of happier days before the unfathomable evil infiltrated their lives, devastating everything in its wake. It is a sad and unfortunate tale, and our thoughts are with the victims, whose lives were tragically cut short, and the loved ones they left behind.